Welcome to Media Melanie Talks TV. I'm Melanie, and today I'm back to talk about The White Lotus Season 3, Episode 5 on HBO Max. It's called Full Moon Party. There's only 3 episodes left in the season, and I would like to take your temperature. Who do you think ends up being the perpetrator from that shootout we heard in the premiere? Who do you think is behind the robbery? And most importantly, what character or which characters do you think end up dead this season? They're doing a good job of leading us in many different directions. Each episode has references to characters and their demise, most specifically Chelsea. Every single episode, either she has mentioned something bad happening, and this one, it happened to be her friend Chloe, that said all the models that she worked with who were romantics ended up heartbroken or worse, and then goes on to say that she thinks her boyfriend, Gary, also known as Greg, could actually be capable of killing somebody. That makes me think with all of that prominent focus, perhaps those two are off the table. I've also been saying Tim Ratliff seems to be a prime contender with the mindset he's in, the fact he's taking all of this lorazepam, and the fact that because Guy Talk is so bad at his job as security guard, Tim was actually able to acquire the gun. However, with that frame of mind he's in and the fact we saw him writing a suicide note, even though Victoria did walk in to stop him, it makes me think Tim is really not out there to hurt anybody else. And if he was, I think it would only be to protect his family. Also, did the shootout at the beginning sound like multiple guns? If we only had the Tim Ratliff gun at play here, I think that is a big red herring, and perhaps the guns come from off-site, potentially even the Russians, who we got to see more of in this episode. Something else that I noticed in this episode was the lighting. In the pool, on the full moon party boat, there was a lot of red going on, and I'm wondering if the coloring is also some kind of clue. When they jumped into the pool and everything went red, at first I'm like, oh my gosh, is there like blood happening? So there was not, but I do wonder, is this red, is the lighting setting the table for bad things that are gonna happen amongst these two groups? For me, it was most prominent for the friend group in the pool and on the boats. So could these two groups end up being involved in whatever bloodshed happens? That red lighting seemed very intentional to me. Oh, and let's not forget about this Sam Rockwell monologue. Are you even kidding me? And the look on Rick's face the entire time it was happening, TV gold. Before we get into more of this, including that weird scene between Lachlan and Saxon, some of the best Victoria content I think that we've seen all season, and more, make sure you hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe to my channel, especially if you like videos where I talk about TV shows like this. I will be back covering the Severance Season 2 finale this Friday on Apple TV Plus, and what a season that has been. And Happy Face premieres on Paramount Plus this week, so definitely catch my coverage for that as well. Okay. Where should we start? Why don't we get into the Ratliff family first? I think one of the people who are kind of off the radar and maybe haven't been on my list as somebody that could be a victim in this, Piper. She seems so young, so innocent, so entitled, and she finally breaks the news to her parents that she does want to spend her time here in Thailand. This scene between her and her parents, specifically Victoria, might be one of my absolute favorites. Piper says something like, the monk who's in charge there, he wrote this book. Victoria's like, well, Charles Manson wrote books and Bill Clinton wrote books, and then goes on to say, oh, you want to live in Taiwan? I mean, come on, Victoria, we're in Thailand. She brings up China. All of these biases and preconceived notions about various things, all while she's in this haze, but also missing her lorazepam. So it does seem like she's maybe overcompensating with the alcohol. But either way, very much against her daughter Piper staying there. And then with everything that's going on with Tim, she does ask him at the end, what's going on? And Tim doesn't say anything or open up. She obviously knows something. And it's making me think maybe the entire Ratliff family ends up staying in Thailand to escape all of the trouble that Tim has got them into. If Victoria is horrified about what people will say about her daughter living in Thailand to study in a monastery, imagine the dismay when she finds out her husband is an actual criminal. She's referred to him as a Boy Scout. He says that he was also an altar boy when he's discussing the religion aspect of it with his daughter. I don't know, things are not looking good for the Ratliffs, but speaking of the Ratliffs, let's just move over to this boat party and the party on land that they are having with Chloe and with Chelsea. Okay, you guys. First of all, when Lachlan says, I'm going to take you down someday, yes, they are on drugs, they're all drinking, they're partying. Is there something to that line? Is it possible that whatever goes down, what if Lockie ends up with the gun and ends up putting it in his brother's face? Was there actual intent in that comment, or was it playful? But the most disturbing of all, I mean, okay, so I get it. They're in a different country. They're taking drugs. They're partying with some girls after Saxon's like, yeah, you just got to go after what you want. Lockie, meanwhile, is like, yeah, but what if life is a test to see if we're good people? Saxon's like, oh no, bro, that is definitely not what it's all about. So they end up in the position where they are probably all going to hook up. The girls kiss, and then the brothers kiss. I am almost horrified to watch the next episode. I'm wondering if something will disrupt this scene or if they are actually going to hook up. We've had these little clues of incest the entire time, and incest is just really disgusting. And I know this is a TV show, it's fictional, but please, I do not want to see brothers kissing. It was creepy enough watching Lockie check out his brother and his dick when he was in the mirror in the shared hotel room. Like, I do not want to see brothers kissing. I think it's weird. I don't know, maybe some people are into that. Fine, like, go get it on with a group of people. That's great. But I draw the line at family relations, and I really hope that is something that we do not see. And if we do, could the regret or guilt surrounding that, like when they wake up the next morning, perhaps come into play for this shootout? Are the Ratliffs not only going to be involved in some shootout at a Thai resort, but also criminal activity? And I don't know, perhaps Piper ends up going to the monastery and never coming back and completely dissociating herself with this family. What a wild time it is for the Ratliffs. Let's move into the fractured friend group. Something that I said at the very beginning of the season was the fact that it seemed like Jacqueline was definitely pushing Valentine on Lori. But in my mind, I'm like, the girl wants him for herself. And that finally came to fruition. They were at the club, they were partying. When Jacqueline was dancing with the guys on the dance floor and those other, who we came to find out are Russian girls, were watching her, at first I thought, okay, they recognize her as an actress and they're like, oh, what is she doing out there with potentially our guys or maybe guys that we were talking to? But then once they get in the argument and altercation with the Russian guys, they start yelling at each other. I don't really think they cared about Jacqueline at all. I think Jacqueline just has some major issues with being in this phase of her life, being judged, and I don't know, maybe she is coming up towards the end of her career. And obviously, she is yearning for attention. She is craving something. Her boyfriend still hasn't talked to him on the phone. Valentine ends up coming back to the villa after they all end up leaving. And Kate literally the entire time is like, okay, time to go to bed. She's sitting there in her pajamas. Meanwhile, Lori, that girl's having the time of her life, from the dance floor to the shots. And by the way, those vodka shots, I was like, oh no, high risk factor. You are in another country. Has anybody seen any of these movies where you meet up with a group of guys, they buy you shots? I don't know. I was literally waiting for roofie cocktails for them to pass out back in their villa, and then maybe the Russian guys robbed them, which I also think that they're probably responsible for the robbery as well. But okay, nothing happened. They didn't put roofies in their shots, which actually kind of did surprise me. And then they have this party. Lori takes her top off. She is having the best time. And you know what? Good for her. But what will the fallout be once she finds out Jacqueline sleeps with Valentine? I think that will present even more of a fracture within that group. And we've already had some of that with the whole political situation and finding out that Lori and Jacqueline are most definitely on a different side than their friend Kate, who lives in Austin and is much more conservative. So how is that all going to play out? I guess we will see. And is it possible that these Russians, if they have access to guns, if they committed the robbery, could they also be responsible for the shootout? And is there some component in here where there's a jealousy factor, perhaps? It comes to light, there's a little kerfuffle about, who got the guy, who didn't. They end up arguing, and then there's a shootout. I just can't picture these women being involved in a shootout. However, the shady Russians, that's a different story. And during that scene, we do get more dick and we get some boobs. So we are up to now 3 dicks this season and a pair of boobs. Will we get more? To be determined. Most prominent in this episode, one of the biggest highlights for me besides Victoria's performance here, Sam Rockwell and Rick in Bangkok. We knew there was going to be this big guest, and it's kind of funny because Sam Rockwell is actually together with Leslie Bibb, who plays Kate, so that's kind of a fun tie-in here. But what a monologue. Are you even kidding me? Rick, Walton Goggins, is sitting there listening to this guy, they're friends. He orders a chamomile tea. Rick is drinking. They've never hung out sober before. And this guy obviously is somewhat nefarious. He obviously fled to Thailand because of something that he did. And he's been on quite a journey. Well, he's been there. He goes on to talk about the fact that he's been with everybody. He's been with women. He's been with men, multiple people at once, 1,000 nights of this debauchery. And it has made him come to realize he actually wants to be one of these Asian girls that he is sleeping with. So turns out he also then starts hiring an Asian woman to watch as he's dressed up in lingerie, getting plowed by some other guys and girls. And I mean, wow. And this just went on. And I think my favorite part about it was Walton Goggins' performance here. He did not say much, and he did not have to. The look on his face as he is sitting there listening to this and like, yeah. I mean, come on. And there's definitely a big theme of sex within this entire episode. I mean, gosh, Belinda's there with Porn Chai. The girls are there with all of their Russian dudes. We have obviously the boat / maybe incest situation going on. So that is a thread that is very much woven throughout this episode. And getting this sort of monologue by a very talented actor and guest star who we should be seeing in the next episode as well. Seems like he's going to be doing a little role play for this con that Rick is going to run on Jim Hollinger. But I mean, you guys, like 10 out of 10 performance here. Who even comes up with this? I mean, talk about getting inside of somebody's head and something that I just was not expecting. That was really interesting to me and very powerful. I just can't get over it. And again, just the look on Rick's face that entire time. That was me, except I think my jaw might have actually been lower to the ground. What a standout scene in this episode. And I'm really excited to see how exactly Sam Rockwell's character will come into play in the next episode and what's going to go down for Rick. I mean, this could be very bad. He has a gun. He's going to approach Jim Hollinger, who I'm still kind of convinced is actually his dad and not necessarily the person responsible for his downfall. So still a lot to unravel with the whole Rick storyline. Meanwhile, Chelsea was calling him and was feeling pretty bad. He wasn't answering. She's trying to do the right thing. She's a hopeless romantic at heart. And then she's like, you know what? Whatever. I'm going to have fun. My friend Chloe is right. So, you know, all the things happen over there on the boat party situation. But Rick ends up calling her, which I just thought was so sweet, especially after hearing this literal insane monologue about this man and his sexual exploits and where his mind is at in terms of where he stands in those different situations. I mean, maybe Rick actually does have a soft spot for Chelsea, and somehow that awoke something in him where, you know, he's like, you know what? Maybe I actually need to take this girl more seriously because she does love me. Really interested to see where Rick and Chelsea are as well by the end of this season. And is it possible that Rick ends up dying even before he makes it back to the White Lotus and then there's a whole nother death? I mean, we could have a bigger body count this season than we've had before. And again, only 3 episodes left to see exactly who's the victim, who's the perpetrator. And again, drop your thoughts down in the comments and let me know who you think it is. Let's get into the staff a little bit more now. We talked about Guy Talk and the fact that he's the worst security guard of all time. Fabian even comes through the gate and is like, oh, hey, you know, what's wrong? And Guy Talk's like, oh, no, nothing to see here. That would have probably been an opportunity to say, hey, by the way, the gun is missing. And I imagine Fabian would have then looked at the footage and been like, okay, so you got distracted by Mook and then you just let this drunk guy stumble in here and take a gun. I think Fabian would have actually taken care of business and confronted Tim in a more forceful way than Guy Talk did. Guy Talk will either be dead or fired by the end of this episode. If we are talking about people who are going to be a victim, the guy deserves to die just for being stupid and for putting this entire resort in danger. Now, again, it's a TV show. I don't ever want anybody to really die. But, I mean, I don't know. Guy talk, like, you're digging your own grave here, bro. Then we have Belinda. She even talks to Fabian about Greg, who we know is Gary here. And Fabian's like, oh, hey, this guy's asking about you. He's rich. And is kind of like pushing this agenda on her, even though he has a girlfriend. And Fabian may have his priorities in the wrong spot if he thinks that Belinda wants to go and hook up with this LBH. And just because he's got all the money. But Belinda's like, no, hey, I think this guy is actually a murderer. And Fabian just does not seem to be very concerned about it. So I don't know, like maybe there's some sort of agreement he has with Gary. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think because they took the time to bring John Gries as Greg and Gary back this season to carry over the storyline from before. I mean, he has to come into play. It's not going to be that just nothing happens to him, especially after Chloe makes the comment that she thinks he could actually be capable of killing somebody. Now, is that too obvious and maybe he's put his bad guy ways to rest? I am not exactly sure. But Belinda, we still haven't seen her son Zion, the guy we saw in the opening scene where the body is floating towards him in the lagoon. But she's very worried. Not only is she worried because of the whole potential murderer situation and him recognizing her, but the fact that she'd been hearing this noise. When Pornchai took that dresser, moved it out, and I saw that lizard, I was like, oh no, I do not think I could deal with that. My cat brings lizards into our house all the time. They're 10 times smaller than that, and I freak out every time at their little wriggling bodies. This thing looked like a mini alligator. You can call it a lizard if you want. I don't know if it was an iguana, whatever species it was. That thing looked huge, and I am Belinda reacting to that lizard. Oh my goodness. Another question I have for you, do we think that Belinda and her friend end up getting it on? There's a lot of talk and sexual innuendo in this episode, as I previously mentioned. I'm going to say our girl ends up getting laid, and you know what? Good for her. She could use it. She's under some stress. Her son's not here yet. Let it go, Belinda. Go have a fun night because you don't know if you're going to live to see the next day at the White Lotus. Overall, I think this episode was good. I would have liked perhaps just a little bit more. I mean, we've only got 3 episodes left. The pacing has been relatively slow, and yes, they are building the story. They're definitely doing a good job of building the dramatic tension, leading us in one direction or another. It is hard to solve this mystery, and I don't know that it's really about solving the mystery because it may end up either being something that we never guessed, or they are feeding us these clues and we are supposed to take them and read into the fact that, okay, yes, perhaps it is going to be Chelsea involved in some way. I mean, every single episode has had a reference of Chelsea dying or something bad happening to Chelsea. Is that too obvious, though? What I would like to see is one of the lesser obvious characters either be involved or end up being a victim. And like I said, when Lockie makes that comment to Saxon about, I'm going to take you down someday, and then the way that they flashed from the brothers over to Piper for just that quick second while she's having the dinner with her parents, I just think there's something to that. Could Lockie and Piper somehow be involved? I mean, they're the most innocent, least likely. For me, that would make things really interesting, and I would love to see it. I don't know that there will be any type of happy ending for the Ratliffs. I just can't imagine them going back to the States and, everything's gonna be fine, especially with Tim, who, again, is in this very fragile mindset, literally has a gun and wrote an actual suicide note. I mean, things are not looking good for our guy here. And we've got some other things to solve as well. Obviously the murder, obviously who's committing the murder. If in fact there even is a murder, perhaps the body floating in the lagoon is accidental. I mentioned that before too. I mean, maybe Tim stumbles in his lorazepam haze and he ends up being the one in there completely unrelated to the actual shootout. But with the introduction of these Russians, I don't know, I just think there is some tie-in to the robbery. Could they have their hands in something deeper? Is Valentine just this shady guy who does this sort of scam all the time, all across Thailand or surrounding the resort? I'm not exactly sure. I am definitely excited to find out, though. And I guess my next question is, will Mike White take one of the characters from this season and move them into the next season? This is mostly an anthology show. However, there are some threads that go from season to season, as we see with Belinda, as we see with Gary/Greg. I'm wondering if they will end those storylines and then maybe pick up another. There seems to be a lot to resolve with the Ratliff family. Perhaps that could come into play, and then they have to go stay at another White Lotus resort somewhere to keep out of the States and keep out of trouble. So I'm curious to see if there will be some carryover from this season to the next, and if they will end these other two storylines. Hopefully we'll get some more answers next week. I do hope the pacing picks up a little bit. Really excited to see more of Sam Rockwell after this incredible monologue from this episode. And again, Parker Posey, you are just killing it as Victoria. I love, 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 love her character from top to bottom. The accent took a little bit to get used to, but it has grown on me so much, and just every single expression on her face, every word that drawls out of her mouth, I am so here for it. What was your favorite part of this episode? Definitely drop a comment. Let me know how you feel about this potential incest situation, which is just incredibly gross. Tell me who you think the perpetrator could be. Let me know who you think the victims are. And also, what do you think are the red herrings? What are not red herrings and actual clues that they would like us to follow? I will be back again next week, and like I said, I'm also covering the finale of Severance on Apple TV Plus this week, Happy Face, which is a new true crime series on Paramount Plus, and I've got some other shows on my radar. If there's any show you'd like to see me talk about, definitely drop it in the comments, and I will take it into consideration. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon. Media Melanie, clicking off.